Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the MisinfoCon track at the International Journalism Festival. Thank you for joining us here today at our workshop on the art project. We're going to be here all day at the Sala della Colonne, so please join us in the afternoon as well. Unfortunately, we do have a cancellation. The 2 p.m. session on MID information unfortunately has been canceled due to a COVID travel issue, but we have a 3:30 workshop with Craig Silverman on exposing the people and funding behind ads and websites, so please consider joining us for that. We also have a 5 p.m. panel on free expression for local journalists. So we'll be here all day at the Sala della Colonne. We're also live streaming at perugia.misinfocon.com. If you're not already familiar with the conference website, you can find us on Twitter at MisinfoCon, or just Google MisinfoCon and you should find your way from there. My name is Samantha Sunny. I'm the managing editor of MisinfoCon, which is a community of anti-misinformation researchers, scientists, and civil society engineers. Our session right now is going to be on what is quality vaccine journalism, developing resources for journalists and other community connectors. Our speakers are Andrea Bress, research coordinator for Hacks, Hackers, and the Art Project, Connie Moon Sahat, researcher at large for Hacks, Hackers, and Amy Zhang, a professor at the University of Washington. Because this is online and in person, we are asking everyone to submit questions using a tool called Slido. The information for that is on the website, perugia.misinfocon.com, or again, you can find it on Twitter. As we go on, we encourage you to tweet using the hashtag MisinfoCon or tweet at us using our handle MisinfoCon. And with that, I'm going to let our speakers take it away.
Hello, thank you so much for coming today. My name is Connie Moon Sahat, and I am joined by my colleagues Amy Zhang and Andrea Bress. We wanted to begin by explaining today's format a little bit, and then just to give you a little sense of what we'll try and do in the next 20 minutes. So originally when we put this session together, we had envisioned a 1.5 or 2 hour workshop in which we would ask you, the audience, to break out and work with us to validate an approach regarding quality vaccine journalism. Unfortunately, due to COVID restrictions, both our time and our ability to have discussion has been curtailed, as the conference organizers have asked us to ask you not to talk in this room. So for the next bit, what we'd like to do is to start off with our presentation, which should take about 15 to 20 minutes. And then we invite you to give us some simple feedback via this bit.ly art_vaccines form. We'll show this again also at the end of the talk. But we'll also be addressing, as Samantha mentioned, your questions after the presentation via the Slido link that you also see here. So feel free to drop in your questions there, and then we can address them. We'll pause then, but I definitely would ask you to fill out the beginning of that survey. And then for those who are interested to remain, we've shared out a pack of materials and a highlighter. And if you haven't got a highlighter, please come get a highlighter, because I don't want to bring any highlighters back to me with me to the United States, that we would love to work through, and we'll explain how. But in any case, yes, that's what we hope to be able to do today. Okay, so to begin. Over the past 2 years, we've seen a lot of vaccine reporting. You've seen a lot of vaccine reporting. You may have written a lot of vaccine-related reports. And so there is so much of it, and it can be difficult to sift through easily, especially online. So we wanted to know, in conversation with our journalists and vaccine safety friends at the WHO Vaccine Safety Net Project, what exactly makes for a higher quality versus a lower quality vaccine news article? Is there any way, for example, that everyday readers could tell more about what is a higher vaccine article before they shared it? Could there be a process to help machines, as in news distribution algorithms, sort through vaccine articles and promote those of higher vaccine quality? And even for journalists, some of you who may be part of this group, or some of those that we knew who have been starting to learn to write science journalism on the fly. So we want to share today a little bit more about this process and to get feedback on this questionnaire that we've been developing around quality vaccine journalism. Before we get there, let us tell you a little bit about the project that this comes from and the tool that we're trying to build. The Analysis and Response Toolkit for Trust project is led by Hacks Hackers and by the University of Washington Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering, with partners such as Wikimedia DC and the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. It has had the good fortune of being funded as a United States National Science Foundation Convergence Accelerator project, which is a national program trying to accelerate multidisciplinary research into practical application or research into action. That social media sharing problem that I referenced earlier is the challenge that the project is trying to address, but now through a very specific focus. What we're trying to support is people addressing social media messages like these. For example, I'm not sure about getting my child vaccinated. Say you come across this in a parent Facebook group. Or say on the Twitter feed, you find a person that maybe you're even related to, maybe it's your uncle, who ends up sharing the latest rumor on government tracking chips within vaccine injections. So in cases of online conversations like these, when you want to make sure that the people that you care about have accurate information, what do you say? And how do you say it? We believe that trusted conversations require reliable information and creative skill. So our project, the Analysis and Response Toolkit for Trust, or ART, aims to connect online community members to expert guidance on having conversations in trust-building ways in analysis and response that help complete the sentence, "In conversation, I could." For example, how to best respond does depend on having reliable information about the topic, but equally upon factors like your relationship with the poster, the tone of the question, and the platform that you're on, among others. The best way to understand our toolkit is through the flagship tool that we are building, ART Guide. Think of this software tool like a pair of X-ray glasses that could show community members, moderators, or journalists on the one hand the right cues to assess the quality of information. And then on the other, the tool could offer suggestions on how one could respond to others. One might correct, but one actually might also empathize, ignore, listen, inquire. There are many other possibilities based off of research. Why ART? Our toolkit is focused on providing users with different possibilities for conversation because we know that while reliable information is out there on topics like vaccines, it can be hard to access via the internet. You know this. There's misinformation, there's disinformation, or people actively trying to promote belief in untrue things. In addition, social media, we know, can contribute to polarization and distrust. So small online communities and conversations do matter when it comes to accessing reliable information. Consider the growth of vaccine hesitancy over the past years in certain contexts. Vaccine hesitancy, as you may know, was listed as one of the top 10 global threats by the World Health Organization in 2019. As of March 31st of this year, there was an over 15% difference in vaccination rates between the neighboring countries of the United States and Canada. So take, for example, in the 5 years or older category in the United States, 69.7% of the population is vaccinated, contrasted to 85.36% in Canada. Both countries, it should be noted, there is an overall abundance to access to vaccines. Access is not the issue. So because we believe that it's the people in the middle of these conversations who know best what approach feels right, based off of their knowledge on context and background of the people that they're talking to, we want to build our support to our efforts and our resources to support these smaller local efforts. So to build online trust-building conversations, we have been developing 3 tools that place the principles of analysis and response more in the hands of online participants who need help in tailoring their own engagement. Art Guide, as I mentioned, which is our main tool, is a software app that will surface suggestions for analysis and response based on the goals of the user in conversation. Amy will explain a little bit more about this tool in a second. And feeding Art Guide are two other tools in the background. Art Catalog is a research catalog of conversational response and intervention research stemming from psychology, conflict resolution, and media literacy. And also Art Evaluations, a set of questionnaires that isolates points of analysis, such as news quality, misinformation, and harmful content.
Okay, so I'm going to do a quick deep dive into the tool that we are planning to build. As mentioned, the target users of our tool are people who we term community connectors. These are the people that are on the ground having these conversations with people in their local community on a regular basis. So they can be like completely lay people who are just very enthusiastic about combating vaccine misinformation online or with their family and friends. They can also be experts of some kind, maybe journalists or scientists or medical professionals who are taking time out of their day to have these conversations on social media, or maybe they're encountering these conversations as part of their work. So we did need-finding interviews with people who have had experiences with encountering and responding to misinformation online, and we had two major takeaways that was useful for us for our tool. So one, people are burned out from having these very emotionally draining conversations. Maybe you all have had experience with this yourselves, trying to have conversations about misinformation that you see, trying to correct or talk to people that you know are spreading misinformation. People are also worried about safety when it comes to responding online, particularly in an online public context. And they're also unsure about whether they're having any impact. So maybe they're having these conversations, but they don't really know if they're really getting anywhere with it. And so in our interviews with people who are doing this, they said that they really needed something that's quick, easy to use, and also trustworthy, so backed by research. So with that in mind, I'm going to walk you through a mock prototype of the tool. We're still in the process of designing and implementing it. So say I'm a concerned citizen and I see a post on Twitter that's expressing hesitation about vaccine efficacy and linking to a dubious source, perhaps. And now I'm thinking that I might want to respond to this person's tweet, but I'm not really sure how to do so or what's the best way to do so. And maybe I'm trying to correct the person that is posting this tweet and get them on the right track in the future, but maybe there's also, I'm imagining there's also other viewers of this tweet, and I might want to respond to get at them, even if I might not necessarily be able to correct the person that I'm actively responding to. So if I had this goal, I would then go to our tool, which would be publicly available, where I have the option of then pasting in a URL to the social media post if it's public. If I don't have a URL to the social media post, say it's a private post, I could paste in the text of the post. And then if I don't have either of those things, maybe it's a conversation I'm having like in person with someone, I could just also go straight to more generic guidance on how to respond. So after doing that, say in this case I did have a public URL to a Twitter post. Then I would paste that link in, and our tool has the ability to then go and gather information about that Twitter post, such as metadata about that post for me, and then alert me to what in that metadata would be interesting to consider when evaluating and responding to this post. So we have some examples. The text might be a little bit small to see, but I'll just point out some things. So, for instance, I pasted in a link to a Twitter URL, Twitter post, and maybe the tool detects that this particular source has a bad rating according to a third-party service that rates news organizations such as Media Bias Fact Check. And knowing that information would help me answer questions like, how high quality is this information? I might also get information about the tactics being used in this post, such as if it's invoking emotion or appeals to fear that might cause people to be more alarmed. I could also possibly see information about the poster, such as whether the poster is likely to be a bot, which might tell me whether it's worth even bothering to engage with this Twitter account. So we provide all this information to folks, and With that information, I can then go to our next page, which is the response page. So we have this analysis page where you're kind of analyzing this post that you're thinking of responding to. And then we have this response page where I can now see examples of responses that I could make to that Twitter post. So for instance, on the analysis page, we found that the source was dubious. And so in this page, the tool pulls up an example response. So we've written these templates that points out in the response the bad rating of the source and lets the reader go and verify that for themselves. So it would link out to like media bias fact check, for instance. Also, I show an example response that points out the specific tactics used in the post. So maybe it might be useful to say back to the person who made this post, you know, this post is using such and such tactics, like make sure to look out for this in the future. Maybe that's useful for educating any readers of the post to watch out for this tactic as a kind of like pre-bunking strategy. And importantly, our goal for this kind of response set of, this set of template responses is to have something here that you can just copy and paste if you want to. You can also customize it for your particular needs, but we're giving you something that you can more easily work off of. We also have associated with each response template tips that can kind of explain the reason why the response is written that way and has links to allow you to dive into the research that's informed these template responses that we've come up with. And we also would like for people to go to this page and be able to be exposed to the different goals you might have for responding. As Connie mentioned earlier, like maybe you don't just want to correct the poster, maybe you're also thinking about empathizing with the poster or trying to listen more to what the poster is saying. So in our tool, we want to have the ability to show you the different kinds of responses you could make for the different kinds of goals you might have in this conversation.
Okay, so now just to take that step back to the tools that power the guide and the main focus of today's session. So again, what makes for quality vaccine journalism? And this is really about a question that's trying to push towards the positive end of the spectrum. I think we have a familiarity of what we don't like in journalism, but if we want to articulate what we want, what we like, what's good about a specific article, how do we get to that, that end of the spectrum? So in connection with our news quality initiative, we've been taking an approach over the past couple of years that considers specialized news quality through a layered approach of one of growing concentric circles. And in the first case, we would consider basic questions regarding an article's or source's general news quality. But then, basically, as something becomes more specialized, then layers of questions are added. So for example, then science and health quality, and then this is the question of this project, is there room for vaccine quality evaluation? To try and answer this question, last December, we teamed up with science and health journalists, with technology stakeholders from major platforms, and also a representative of the WHO vaccine safety net to push the concept further, resulting in a list of questions related to article evaluation that you see here today. For those who are deep in this realm of questions and quality, you may know that actually there can be over 100 questions that might bear some relationship to news quality when it comes to parsing things online. So what we wanted to do was to whittle down the questions to what might be most important and answerable to a yes-no framework. Ideally, totaling up the sums would give you a general ballpark as to whether or not an article is great, or it's fine, or it's problematic. We're still working out these details. To highlight a few of the questions from the more specialized realms, here are three that are in the printed questionnaire. One is related to, does this report refer to an expert in the specific field of scientific study? So this is really getting at these kinds of reports or news articles that you may have also observed, that difference between trying to get someone who's a general medical practitioner to comment on vaccines, that pointing out that relationship to have a vaccinologist or someone who's informed about infections really does maybe matter when it comes to quality on that specific question. Another question that's in this questionnaire has to do with the author or the organization. Does the author have a background on the science beat or in science, or does the outlet organization have a science editor or reporter? And this is not to say that you can't be at an organization that doesn't have this, or that you yourself may not have that background yet. In terms of writing a particularly great piece on vaccine health, for example. What this is, though, to point out, is something that's parallel to our analysis of news articles. We would say that an organization with greater editorial experience, with at least a few editors, may have over time the greater likelihood of writing news articles at a higher level of quality. So that when that happens also for science and vaccine journalism, we expect that to be the same way. And then finally, related to this particular topic, is the question of, does the article or report express confidence in the overall efficacy of vaccines? And this is the question that was of most value and importance, especially to the scientists that we talked to. In reviewing a number of articles on vaccine reporting over the past couple of years, it's really to ask this question of, does the reporter potentially present the question of vaccines in a both-sidism kind of way? In other words, does it kind of make potentially into a controversy whether or not vaccines are overall efficacious? If the article starts calling that into question, as we have seen in a number of cases, this is truly problematic, even if there are very specific things in the article that are quite correct. And so for a vaccine quality assessment, this article may not pass. So anyway, these are an example of some of our questions, and so we hope in the end, right, that our questionnaire is going to help three areas. One is that it would help everyday readers, before they shared something, through that art tool that Amy walked us through, that it would potentially help machines as in news distribution algorithms through those crowdsourced results over time. So you can imagine, basically, for those of you who are familiar with how news ranking and recommendation works, these questions are also made easy for people that are to be raters. And then finally, our main question is, can this questionnaire also help journalists, some of whom we know have been learning to write science journalism on the fly, at least as a very first step? The journalists that we've talked to so far think that it might, and we'd love to learn if this is the case from you today. So again, as I began the presentation, we'd love to we invite you to tell us what works or what doesn't work based on your perspective. You can see at this initial Google form some areas for you to enter in your thoughts, since unfortunately question and answer spoken is not permitted. So that's one way, but also this Slido link is where we can answer questions for right now. We'll take just a moment to pause for that, and then for those who are interested in staying further to work through the questions that are in that printed handout, we'll be happy to take on that second part of our session. But finally, too, if you haven't gotten a highlighter, feel free to come up and get one, because we really don't want to bring any highlighters back to the United States. Anyway, thank you. We're good? Okay, cool. So we'll just pause here for a moment, and if you have questions, feel free to type them up in the Slido, and then if not, we'll take up this questionnaire in just a minute.
Okay, so we do have a question here. So a question from the audience is, do you have any ideas on the best way to get these tools to community connectors?
Yeah, I'm not sure who asked that question, but that's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, so I think there's a number of strategies. It's always tricky when we think about dissemination. So one, we are working with a number of partners, such as folks at Wikimedia, folks at the WHO, where we're hoping to have used the tool. In addition, we're hopeful that if we can release it kind of widely on social media, that there could be organic kind of discovery of the tool due to other people using the tool, and then people seeing that and being able to access the tool themselves. So those are our first kinds of lines of strategy, and we'll also pursue traditional avenues like publicizing on social media, speaking to news orgs, things like that. Thanks.
And also, if anyone has any suggestions about ways to reach out, that would be great as well. Another question is, could you share more about the need finding research? I'm curious about the emotional burnout you mentioned.
Yeah. So we talked to a number of folks, just everyday people who have friends that are dealing with that are trying to analyze this information and make sense of it. It isn't necessarily that they're hardline anti-vaccine folks or anything. They're just trying to understand, and just having conversations with them. People have talked about this being draining because they might be seeing a lot of information elsewhere, such as through the news they're accessing, or other people that they're talking to, or other social media platforms that they're on. And it's hard in a single conversation to kind of overcome the hours and hours that people might be spending in these other places hearing other things. So people definitely talked about burnout in that case. We've also talked to folks like doctors who are dealing with this in their workplace and having to have these conversations in their workplace, and thus are tired about having it outside of their workplace. We also talked to folks who are experts on just vaccines and having issues with friends potentially avoiding the subject with them and not wanting to ask these questions because they are kind of concerned about being judged by their friend. So this was definitely a common theme that we heard from folks, and even for the people who are still actively trying to respond to others on social media, trying to respond to their friends, they said, well, I don't really know if what I'm doing is working. I'd love to hear some more research about the right way to respond versus not respond. I've had some good experiences, I've had some not good experiences, and also would really love something that's kind of easy to use, because every time I do this, it can be really draining.
And maybe, I guess, just to add a little bit more to the context, why we're so interested in trying to support people's both their emotional, I suppose, willpower to remain in these conversations, but also to give them research-backed tools or resources that explain, what might be that better way to approach, is that at least in not every context, right, is so contested, but in the areas, for example, in the United States in English, where vaccines are contested, we are seeing these pools of small communities to continue to become more vaccine hesitant, with their intersecting links, for example, with health and wellness groups or parent groups, that there has been research over the past year that has been showing that the prevalence or the increase of resource shares, say, that are linking to conspiracy theories are increasing. So these smaller conversations are turning, and they're gravitating, they're becoming more attractive, where these things, questions related to vaccine hesitancy are on the rise. So this is, again, the context that we're trying to figure out. How do you try to think about maintaining even a level of available resources on vaccines, people willing to share a link to a trusted, reliable resource if you believe in let's say, WHO-backed science, for example. So that's really the effort as well. So now just basically related to the questionnaire, and for those of you that don't have the printout, if you go to the Google form, there are links related to some of the articles that we've given as examples. So really this is just where you would pick one of these articles, or maybe if you have a printout, you've been given one, to go ahead and work through the beginning questions related to, whether or not this article may be generally doing well on a vaccine, generally doing well in terms of news journalism standards. And then basically with these increasing layers of questions related to science and health journalism and vaccine journalism. So yeah, feel free to go ahead and fill these out, and then we'd love to hear questions or thoughts that you may have related to your own observations based off the questionnaire or the articles that you're reading.
And again, feel free at any point to drop any questions in the Slido that you may have.
And as a final note, we'll actually just be hanging out right outside. If anybody would love a chat that doesn't, a real live chat as opposed to a Slido chat, in front of the Sandri Cafe, so right outside after this session.
And if you haven't already grabbed a highlighter, please swing by up front. Just grab one of these, because we don't want to bring them home. So please help yourself. Okay, we do have another question. Are you able to do this in other languages too? Is that planned for the future? I work in a multilingual market, so it's a great question.
Yes, ideally, we'd love for this to be able to work in other languages, but we are basically wanting to validate it first. In terms of the National Science Foundation's support, they're asking us to make this first work dominantly for the United States and English language markets, and then hopefully we can figure out partners to branch out.
Okay, another question is, do you guys have any evidence that tools such as the one you're building actually work when it comes to changing people's minds or opinions?
Yeah, so the templates that we're providing in the tool and the tips, they're coming from research that's been conducted where academics have done experiments testing specific types of interventions or specific types of responses in different audiences. So how well each of those types of interventions work kind of depends. There has been research on certain age groups or certain audiences, but not others. So it's not necessarily the case that a particular intervention always works really well for everyone. And there's always still research to be done on different kinds of interventions or responses, but we kind of want to put all of these things into the tool. We think that the people who are these community connectors that are closer to their audience would have some expertise in crafting a particular response or deciding among these response templates to choose from. In addition to the research that's already been done, we hope to use our tool to do additional research and test some of these interventions and kind of evaluate the use of our tool over time.
So we have another question. So I've noticed there's a question about the author's background in the assessment. Have you considered building out a similar assessment on vetting an expert or an author?
That's an interesting question. I'm trying to figure out where to take that one. So I guess in this particular question, it's framed. Oh, I see. So maybe, because I'm trying to figure out who asked the question, how to ask more information about that question. Oh, hi. So, so what I'm wondering is, this is so awkward, in terms of this thing, is, in other words, like for this particular self-assessment, there is something going on, right, where we're asking someone to kind of evaluate the reporter and where they're matching. And so I suppose you're asking, like, specifically whether or not the experts that are referenced themselves are also matching with their stated expertise. Is that what you would say the question is? Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, this is right. This is a little tough because we would be relying on the reporter to some extent to sort of match and say this is an expert in X, right, and be accurate in their assessment of X. But for a general reader of this article, I mean, we do want them to kind of look up the experts and decide for themselves, like, is this an expert, at least within the field that they're stating? We're not actually necessarily asking them to match their own expertise, rate their expertise, but to say, like, are they an expert in the field of the expertise that they're professing? And the reason why this is interesting for us is that when it has come to the vaccine-related issue, is that there are a number, of course, of anti-vaxxers that have medical backgrounds. But it's very interesting then when you say that even if they have a medical background, it's not often in the area of the medicine that they are now trying to profess upon. So we only want them to make an observational link about that, not necessarily to kind of rate them on their expertise beyond that. And I suppose added to this, like, if there are any questions here that don't work for you, like, we would love to know, like, or that you kind of are like, not really sure about this and I want to understand the philosophy behind it, we'd love to learn more.
Also questions that you might want to add to, that you think that should be included that haven't been included would be great as well. So someone had just said, I find the tool could be potentially used to teach media literacy, at least to high school students. Did you consider releasing it to schools and educators?
That is a really interesting idea. We actually hadn't thought of that before, so thank you for that idea. I think that's a really good, I think that the tool definitely intersects to some degree with media literacy training, especially the part of the tool where you can see the tips and you can see the relation to research and thinking about ways to respond. We were imagining the tool as something that you could kind of come back to on a regular basis, like it would actually help you with responding in each and every case, but it could also serve as kind of like an educational guide as well, like just another way to summarize the research in this space.
So we have another question. So at the start of COVID-19, tech platforms were required to identify credible info on vaccines. Have you considered repurposing or distributing this to platforms?
Yes, definitely. We have had conversations with major platform representatives who are interested in this questionnaire for the purpose of potentially evaluating or analyzing quality vaccine articles. And so we do plan on making this questionnaire to release it under an open Creative Commons license, partly for this purpose.
Well, we just want to thank all of you for coming and staying. We know that this format has been a little bit stranger than what we had originally anticipated. We also just want to reiterate, it would be really great if you go to the Google form over here and leave any feedback based off of the assessment that you've seen. And if you give us or you want to ask us any questions, you can please feel free to email any of us. And again, we just want to reiterate that we'll be at the Sandri Cafe, and we would love to chat with anyone, face to face, if you have any questions, and just to kind of discuss a little bit about the project itself. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and there are 4 highlighters left, so just to say.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.